Russia and China are holding a joint maritime exercise in the Baltic Sea where their navies will practice firing at naval and aerial targets. The area, which has seen increased military activity by both Russia and NATO in recent years, is fast becoming a zone of heightened tensions. And now China is in play.
Russian and Chinese warships conducted several drills in the Baltic Sea, widely seen as a show of force by the Kremlin to its potential NATO adversaries. In addition to a live-fire exercise, the war games also simulated a boarding and inspection of vessels, anti-piracy operations, as well as rescue and recovery at sea. Recently, the Baltic Sea has become a zone of contention between Russia and NATO, with warplanes frequently coming in close contact with one another. Moscow has defended the drills, saying it poses no threat to anyone. Although China and Russia have held numerous joint drills over the years, this marked the first time Chinese warships had sailed into European waters to do so. For China, the drill is an opportunity to demonstrate its global reach as a rising military power and interject itself in the region's geopolitical dynamic. Beijing has been gradually expanding its foothold outside of the immediate Asia-Pacific region, opening its first overseas military base in the African nation of Djibouti last month. Although China and Russia are not formal allies, the latest drill is an indication the two sides are strengthening their budding strategic partnership. The two sides also held a similar drill last year near the South China Sea, rattling several countries in the region which are involved in territorial disputes with China. The latest exercise has also triggered a nervous reaction from NATO member states, especially Poland and the Baltic states, who have accused the Kremlin of engaging in repeated military provocations. It's also being interpreted as a powerful statement by both Russia and China that neither country stands alone, despite efforts by Western countries to contain and isolate them over various disagreements.
Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force has reportedly conducted drills aimed at protecting American warships in peacetime. Tokyo-based Kyodo News reports the hour-long exercise took place on Wednesday morning in waters of Aomori Prefecture with an aim to bolster communications needed for the safe escort of U.S. ships. The navies of both countries have been conducting joint exercises in the region since last Tuesday. They are in line with Tokyo's revised military law that allows Japanese troops to fight overseas. Opposition parties and most of the Japanese public are strongly against the new legislation, saying it violates the country's post-war pacifist constitution.
North Korea is warning the U.S. that it will launch a preemptive nuclear strike on the heart of America if it feels the regime is being threatened by Washington. The remarks came from Pyongyang's Armed Forces Minister Park Yong-sik on Wednesday during a speech to commemorate the 64th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement. The key date, which actually falls today, has been designated by the North as Victory Day, with the regime claiming it prevailed over the U.S. in the Korean War. The threat comes after Pyongyang snubbed Seoul's request to hold joint military talks to soothe rising tensions on the Korean peninsula.
Our top story this hour: Saudi forces have waged a fresh attack on a Shia neighborhood in the kingdom's eastern province, shooting dead at least one person. Locals say tanks and military vehicles have stormed the town of Awamiya in Qatif region, arresting dozens of civilians. They say a barrage of artillery shells have been indiscriminately fired on residential buildings in the region. A series of videos circulating on social media appear to show Saudi troops on the streets and buildings on fire. Reports say at least 2 Indian migrant workers have been injured in the raids. Since 2011, the Shia-populated eastern province has been the scene of anti-regime protests demanding an end to discrimination by Riyadh.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a law ratifying a deal with the Syrian government. The legislation allows Russia to keep its airbase in Syria for almost half a century. The original deal was signed in Damascus back in January. It sets out the terms under which Russia can use its Hmeimim airbase, which it has used to carry out airstrikes against forces opposing President Bashar al-Assad. Putin approved the agreement on Wednesday after the 2 chambers of the Russian parliament backed it earlier this month.
At least 3 Americans died in July fighting ISIS in Syria, but they weren't fighting with American military units. Instead, David Taylor, Nicholas Allen Warden, and Robert Grote were volunteers with the YPG, a mostly Kurdish militia. It's hard to say how many Americans are fighting alongside the YPG, but a 2016 report examining foreign fighters combating ISIS found most Americans doing so are military veterans. Taylor and Warden fit into that category. NBC reports Taylor was a Marine veteran and Warden served in the U.S. Army and French Foreign Legion before joining the YPG in Syria. Grott was not a veteran. He was a welder and an activist who was involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement. One of the YPG's goals is to establish a democratic socialist collective. A Rolling Stone article noted this was one of the reasons some leftist international fighters were drawn to the group. The U.S. has supported the YPG in the fight against ISIS, but the group is linked to the PKK in Turkey, an organization some countries, including the U.S., consider a terrorist group.
Plans to get tough on Russia are not sitting well with the European Union. Congress overwhelmingly approved a bill Tuesday to add sanctions to Russia, Iran, and North Korea. But it's the Russia sanctions that has the EU warning that our so-called America First policy could backfire.
Today, we're hearing more out of one of America's closest allies who will be most affected by this, and that's the Germans.
I tried to describe that we fundamentally cannot accept that the American government, American politics and Congress, under the guise of sanctions, conduct industrial politics in favor of American energy supplies. This position has not changed, and we will keep saying that loud and clear to the US.
The Nord Stream 2 project is supposed to be an offshore nat gas pipeline that'll carry gas from the Russian Federation to Germany. The Germans will be the most impacted by the tougher Russia sanctions, along with Austria, the Netherlands, and France, who will all benefit from this new supply line. This is just the short list of EU companies who stand to be fined for doing business with Russia under the conditions of the new U.S. sanctions passed by the House of Representatives last night. Those sanctions, though, stirring suspicion by some due to statements like this on the House floor.
We must continue to focus on how we get our gas here in the United States, our natural gas to Europe, to our allies, so they're not so dependent on Russia.
These new sanctions still have to be passed by the Senate, but all signs point to this bill moving towards President Trump's desk. White House watchers believe this will put the president in a tough spot because while he does want to improve relations between the United States and Russia, he also doesn't want to appear soft on Moscow over allegations of collusion. And at the same time, he has to allay concerns from allies in the EU who say this will pose a threat to the bloc's energy security. The harshest words perhaps coming from the EU President Jean-Claude Juncker saying, quote, "If our concerns are not taken into account sufficiently, we stand ready to act appropriately within a matter of days. America first cannot mean that Europe's interests come last."
Hungary says it's doing Europe a favour, a huge favour, by keeping refugees out. By extension, it's objected in the strongest terms to a demand from Brussels that it, along with every other country in the European Union, had a moral obligation to take in and care for at least a few hundred refugees. Even this token effort was too much for a government which has said Europe's Judeo-Christian ethic is under threat from Islam. Unfortunately, legal opinion in the European Union does not agree. Lawyers advise throwing out Hungary's joint case with its neighbour Slovakia that they should be exempted from the quota scheme. In a sign of how out of step Hungary is, it emerged that the European Union is increasingly pleased that many countries, not just Germany, are doing their bit in resettling refugees, as the quota system demands.
We are finally starting to see proper solidarity. June was a record month for relocation, with more people being relocated than ever before. Almost 3,000 in a single month, bringing the total to over 24,000.
And there was another important ruling for anti-refugee countries in Europe. Slovenia, which copied Hungary and fenced off its borders, won a separate case along with its neighbour Austria that they did have the right to deport refugees to Croatia under rules which demand people must apply for asylum in the first EU country they enter. Had that rule applied to Hungary, itself on the border with the EU, it could have had to house many thousands of refugees. But there is no sign the government will take any notice of the European demand. Elections are on the horizon. The government continues to use its anti-refugee, anti-European rhetoric as its main campaigning tool.
The British immigration minister insists freedom of movement between the UK and Europe will end when the country leaves the European Union in March 2019. Brandon Lewis said a new immigration system would be introduced from the spring of 2019 and that the government wants to reduce immigration to what it calls sustainable levels. Lewis's comments come on the day the British government commissioned a report into the costs and benefits of EU migrants, which is expected to be published in September, 6 months before Brexit is due to take place.
Sweden is about to deport Iranian Christian actress Aydin Stranson back to the Islamic Republic of Iran, where she faces torture, rape, and even death in an Iranian prison. But as Swedish officials have told Aydin, becoming a Christian was her decision, and now it's her problem, and not theirs. Aydin Stranson came to Sweden in 2014 on a work visa, and adopted a Swedish last name. She had starred in films and a TV series in Iran, making her an even bigger target if she is sent back. She says she came to Christ in Iran after seeing video of Muslims stoning a woman to death.
And I decided that moment I don't want to be Muslim anymore.
And then she had a dream.
I had a dream about Jesus. He was sitting near me and he took my hand.
In Iran, where it can be deadly to convert to Christianity, Aydin kept her conversion largely a secret. But when she came to Sweden, she requested a public baptism.
I want to have it baptized in public because I want to say I don't afraid anymore. I'm free, I'm Christian. I want everybody know about that.
After all, Sweden is the humanitarian superpower which welcomed refugees with open arms until the government took too much political heat and decided some have to go, whether it kills them or not. Sweden's migration board even violates its own stated principles that it will never deport asylum seekers to a nation where they will be harmed. Swedish attorney Gabriel Donner has assisted an estimated 1,000 Christian asylum seekers facing deportation.
Do you think in Aydin's case they think she's lying, or they just don't care?
Primarily, we don't care. It's numbers. They have promised the public in Sweden that they will deport more people than before. And so they have to fill the quota.
And when that war breaks, that they would run and hide.
Those just some of the recent words out of a Davis mosque, a Davis imam, now striking at the heart of Muslims who feel misunderstood and Jews who say they've been targeted with hate.
It will say, "Oh Muslim." It will not say, "Oh Palestinian."
The sermon delivered by Imam Ammar Shaheen is one of thousands monitored by the DC-based bipartisan Middle East Media Research Institute over the last 19 years. Stephen Stalinsky directs the nonprofit and spoke to Fox 40 Tonight by phone. Here's what he says his translators discovered the imam preached in Arabic and in some English.
He makes a statement talking about annihilating the Jews and liberating Al-Aqsa Mosque and other things in there. I mean, it's in his words. There's nothing we translated that was mistranslated or put out of context. That's a common thing that when people are caught saying something in Arabic that they did not want to be caught saying, that's what they say.
The Israeli government has again followed the demands of rioting Palestinians and has removed all recently installed security measures at the Muslim entrances to the Temple Mount. But again, that hasn't stopped the riots. Now, even security searches of individual persons will not be tolerated by the PA, as Fatah spokesman Osama Kawasmi stated. He said, quote, "The matter has to do with sovereignty over Jerusalem and is in Israel's court. Israel will be the one deciding whether the region is moving towards a calm or an escalation," end quote. Muslim leaders called off morning prayers at the Temple Mount in what was the last of their boycott at the site, and both Hamas and PA President Abbas's Fatah party have repeated calls for increased confrontations with Israel.
Palestinians celebrate what they see as victory. The Israelis have removed all security measures from the Lions Gate entrance to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound.
This is a victory for the Palestinian street, and they've proven to the whole world that the Palestinians are alive and well and defended Al-Aqsa with all they have.
But despite the joy, no decision has been made by the Waqf, the Jordanian custodians of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, on whether Palestinians can now pray inside the compound or not. It says it's waiting on a technical report on Israel's plans to introduce smart surveillance technology at the gates. Meanwhile, the Israelis have handed over the bodies of the 3 Palestinian men who killed 2 Israeli security forces on July 14th. It was only after a High Court decision that the bodies were returned. The men were buried in the village of al-Faham, north of Jerusalem. The incident led to Israel's introduction of new security measures, a move that angered Palestinians who feared it changed the status quo at the sensitive site. All eyes are now on the Waqf, the Jordanian custodians of the compound, and what decision it makes when it comes to re-entering Al-Aqsa. Even if the religious leaders ask the Palestinians to go back into the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and pray, it's unlikely to happen. Certainly within the next 24 hours, the Palestinians of occupied East Jerusalem finally say that they have a voice that's been ignored far too long. And they're not just protesting what's going on when it comes to security measures at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, but they're protesting against occupation.
President Trump is set to nominate Kansas Governor Sam Brownback as the ambassador at large for international religious freedom. If confirmed by the Senate, he'll run the State Department's office, which promotes religious freedom through foreign policy. Brownback tweeted, "Religious freedom is the first freedom, the choice of what you do with your own soul. I am honored to serve such an important cause."
The Department of Justice filed a brief Wednesday arguing a civil rights law doesn't protect LGBTQ people from workplace discrimination. The department lodged an amicus brief in a case it isn't party to between a company and the estate of a former employee alleging he was fired for being gay. The Obama administration previously signaled on similar cases that the employee could have been covered under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which bans workplace discrimination based on sex. But President Donald Trump's DOJ argues that Title VII only kicks in when, quote, employees of one sex are treated worse than similarly situated employees of the other sex. Sexual orientation doesn't factor into that standard. That puts the DOJ at odds with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, another federal agency supporting the employee in this case. The DOJ says the EEOC doesn't speak for the federal government. This comes the same day President Trump announced transgender people would be banned from the U.S. military.
Carrying resist signs, hundreds of protesters in New York gathered to voice their anger at President Trump's surprise announcement.
What is the point of banning people from joining the army when they are here trying to protect us?
As gays, as trans, as queer people, just for our own president just to shut us down is horrifying. And
America is definitely for everybody, and Trump is not getting the message.
Criticism of Donald Trump's tweet was also felt in the Capitol. Democrats and even some Republicans denounced President Trump's announcement. The House Minority Leader said that providing health care for transgender servicemen and women was an excuse.
It is a cruel and arbitrary decision designed to humiliate transgender Americans who have stepped forward to serve and defend our country. The president's allegations of tremendous medical cost are a bold-faced lie.
If Donald Trump's tweet translates into an actual policy change, civil liberties and rights groups have vowed to unleash a plethora of lawsuits to challenge the ban in the name of equal rights.
Rolling Stone magazine is at it again, now setting their sights on President Trump. Their most recent cover features a photo of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and asks the question, quote, why can't he be our president? You may remember it was also Rolling Stone that glamorized Boston bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev on one of their covers.
Here's a question. Are you sick of hearing about Russia? Well, guess what? Hillary Clinton isn't. She's writing a whole book about it. According to her publisher, it's called What Happened, and it will, quote, connect the dots about Russian interference in the election and describe what it was like to run against an unorthodox candidate. This comes just days after Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer told the Washington Post, quote, when you lose to somebody who has a 40% popularity, you don't blame other things, you blame yourself.
The Trump administration just sanctioned 13 high-ranking Venezuelan officials ahead of a vote that could rewrite the country's constitution. The sanctions came the same day opposition leaders organized a 2-day strike on the country's economy. President Donald Trump issued an ultimatum this month to Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Cancel the vote to elect a new constituent assembly or face, quote, strong and swift economic actions from the U.S. But that vote is scheduled to go on as planned this Sunday. The new assembly would then have the authority to rewrite the struggling country's constitution. But critics and opposition leaders say the move is just Maduro's latest power grab. The sanctions announced Wednesday fall short of penalizing Venezuela as a whole or even specific sectors of its economy. There's been concern that sanctioning the country's oil industry, where it makes 95% of its income, would make matters even worse for the Venezuelan people. Officials told Reuters that the Trump administration isn't ruling out sanctions against the oil industry, and that the latest was the first in a potential steady drumbeat of U.S. responses to Venezuela's deteriorating democracy.
Motorists queued for hours hoping to fuel up. Workers for the government-owned State Petroleum Corporation went on strike at midnight on Monday, leaving fuel distribution at a near standstill.
With the current situation in the country, it is difficult to lead a normal life. When this kind of thing happens, it is tough for the people.
The sudden shortage caught motorists by surprise. Cars and trucks surrounded petrol stations by day 2 of the strike. The workers are protesting at the government's decision to lease fuel storage tanks in the ports of Trincomalee and Hambantota. It's not the first time the workers are striking. They called off their action in April after government leaders promised to listen to their demands. The pumps have run dry in most petrol stations like this one, and people must wait till fresh stocks are brought in. But petroleum workers say their demands must be met before they allow this to happen.
This sign in Karachi says it all. It tells people the petrol is finished. It's the third day of a national strike by fuel transporters that has drained many petrol stations in Pakistan dry. The government's regulator wants to implement more safety rules. It says they're needed after a tanker truck overturned last month and killed more than 200 people when it exploded. But these truck drivers are not happy about the tougher safety measures. On Monday, members of the Oil Tankers Association stopped supplying fuel to all terminals in the country. It wasn't long before people started suffering.
Petrol is not available, which is very worrisome. We're hearing news on TV about a strike by tanker drivers. The government should resolve this dispute so that ordinary people are not inconvenienced by this.
Tomatoes in India are getting their own security detail. Heavy rains since late June have led to a decline in tomato crop yields, causing the vegetables price to rise dramatically. A reported farmer strike may have contributed to the higher price as well. Tomatoes at the indoor market in the state of Madhya Pradesh have reportedly doubled in price over a few days, selling for as much as 100 rupees, or about $1.50 per kilogram. The jump in price makes them attractive to thieves, so some tomato dealers have asked for security to guard the produce, especially when it is being loaded or unloaded for market. Just a month ago, farmers were dumping surplus tomatoes on the side of the road after an especially productive harvest. But the rains and the changing growing season have since damaged existing crops.
Here's a look at flash flooding that has turned the Kansas City metro area this morning into a raging river. Look how high that water is standing. This is footage from 41 Action News KSHB TV in Kansas City, Missouri, where this scene is unfolding. Between 4 to 7 inches of rain fell overnight, and crews are conducting swift water rescues through parts of Kansas City, Missouri. At least one person was rescued from a car that was marooned in deep water. This has been playing out all morning long. Interstate 35 was closed in both directions at Lamar Avenue for a time due to the flooding. Officials said the high water would continue to rise even though downpours are ending.